Hello. This time I want to make a video about an American author, Robert M. Coates. I'll give a little overview of him and then I'll talk about his two books that I've read. So he was an American, I think born in the 1890s, late 1890s, and his family moved around a lot. He actually has an autobiography he wrote called The View from Here, Recollections of Mostly Happy Yesterdays, I think. And I've read the first little bit of it. It focuses a lot on his childhood, like, up to age 18. That's the first, like, 3/4 of the book, which was pretty interesting. But I was really hoping that he talked a little more about his time that he spent in the 1920s in Paris on the left bank. He was in that group of Gertrude Stein and all those people. So Robert McAlmon and everything. So I was hoping he talked more about that because he's a really interesting guy. And his first book, The Eater of Darkness, it actually kind of talks about that sort of scene, because the main character in that story, it's a really, really interesting book. I think people call it the first Dadaist novel in English, the first Surrealist novel in English. I don't really think it's either of those. I mean, the Surrealist would be more reasonable because it doesn't really follow the Dadaist type thing. It is really playful, but Tristram Shandy was pretty playful, so follows a French guy going to New York, and it's told in an experimental style. He does some interesting stuff with parentheses, kind of like E. Cummings, and I wonder if that's where he got some of the ideas from, because they were about the same time. Like Is 5, I think, come out in the mid-20s, so it was about the same time that this was written, 1926. But anyway, it's a French guy going to New York, and he first meets, like almost instantly meets, this mad scientist and ends up in his apartment. And the mad scientist has built an X-ray gun that can go through objects. And I think talks about like all the objects it goes through, the reader's hand, the left button of a general, something like that. And it's pretty hilarious, but then it ends up killing someone, a professor. It like melts his brain or something, and then later they go through this whole detective scene, and one way or another the French guy that went to New York ends up becoming a detective investigating the murder that he helped carry out. So, and it just kind of continues in that really funny way, and the really interesting thing of it is it shows advertising from the time. It has like quotations of dialogue that really have nothing to do with the story, but it gives you a really good idea of the time. So I really enjoyed that book. It's really ridiculous how expensive it is, but I'm planning on typing it up, so let me know if you're interested. I'll probably have it done mid-December, or probably late December actually. Probably, yeah, after Christmas. But anyway, his second novel is called Yesterday's Burdens. And that's the one that I just got finished reading. It's kind of in the same style as The Eater of Darkness. I would say it's a more subdued style. It's not as like crazy out there. But it is in an interesting style. It's not a conventional novel at all. I think it was published in the like early to mid 30s. So it was about 10 years after he wrote The Eater of Darkness. And I think just after this book came out, he became the head art critic for The New Yorker, right when The New Yorker started. And the main character in this book is actually a book reviewer, and he starts out, the main character, in the countryside, and he kind of describes everything in really interesting ways. it didn't really remind me of anyone in particular, but just the sort of like precise details of the countryside, it kind of reminded me of the descriptions that Proust gives of his, his grounds and Swann's grounds outside Paris in Search of Lost Time. So in that way, I really enjoyed it. But then, about a third of the way through the book, he ends up in New York, and this is one of those modernist walking around the city novels that I love a lot, and I was just going to read some sections from it that I thought were representative or interesting. Alright, so this is about halfway through. To feel again the fear, the wonderment of the boy observing the world, to walk back across the bridge and up the causeway toward Edgecombe Heights, pausing at every dozen steps to look down over the railing at the scenes below, at the Manhattan Casino, its black tarred roof sinister beneath the bridge's shadow, at women leaning out tenement windows, creakily pulling in clotheslines, at men in shirt sleeves or undershirts stirring shiftlessly about in dim fourth-floor bedrooms, and I by the bridge's height, made tall enough to penetrate their privacy, at boys playing catch in vacant lots, at men and women coming and going, pausing, greeting each other, hurrying along the streets below, to feel again youth's ununderstandingness, the sense of being life's waif, to alleviate it by standing at the bridge's railing, poring over a world one may observe, but cannot share. And then another section here, it's just a little bit past that. Once, too, coming home late at night from a walk in the downtown sections of the city, I entered a subway station to find it deserted. It was a local stop, Canal Street or Franklin, and the newsstand was glassed in, locked, and untenanted. The ticket agent drowsed, only the faintest and most distant rumblings came from the mouth of the tunnel. I walked listlessly up and down the platform like a visitor in some abandoned museum, staring at the slot machines, the posters, the vacant benches, as such a one might regard the relics of a civilization thus doubly dead. And then, suddenly, the empty platform was invaded. A party of men and women, a dozen or more, and all chattering, laughing, the women's sharp heels clicking smartly on the concrete, their brilliant dresses foaming out beneath their wraps, the men hurrying from one to the other as if in some intricate dance, the men making gallant gestures and the women smiling, nodding their careful coiffures. A party of men and women appeared, the men's deeper voices weaving in with the women's high merriment, and filling the station with an indescribable bright jollity. I cannot tell you how amazed I was, and how uplifted. Where had they come from? I had been walking down Varick Street, and then across to Hudson, and so to Greenwich and Washington, and then zigzagging through the tangle of side streets. All had seemed dark, deserted, and yet in some one of those silent houses these happy strangers had been having their festivity. I moved closer to them, affecting an air of nonchalance, though indeed except when some lady's quick glance, as she turned from one gentleman to another, traversed my face almost unseeingly. They took no more notice of me than might a host of angels of a mortal. But their conversation gave no clue to the mystery. In fact, as soon as I discovered they were speaking Swedish, or some other of the lifting Scandinavian tongues. A local, as if it had been awaiting their arrival, came into the station soon after. I rode uptown with them as far as Times Square, watching them avidly but not enviously, feeling that night, I had shared a dozen lives. That reminds me of Pessoa and his Book of Disquiet and Alvaro de Campos' poems. And then this is a little further along. He's also still walking through the city. I have been too conscious of their eyes. Let me confess it. I can hardly reach the limit of the most casual stroll and turn back along the way I have been I have come without trying to justify my action to whoever may be observing me. I snatch out my watch, glance at it, turn back hastily, or I peer at the house numbers, mumble my lips as if repeating an address, walk back with an air of retracing my steps, or I look up puzzled, with one who in pursuit of his thoughts has been led out of his way. So to the woman standing in the tenement entrance, to the grocer's boy piling empty crates along the curb, to the iceman whose head just rises from his cellarway, I explain my reversal of routes. I am a man who has suddenly remembered an important engagement, or one who on an errand has been led past his destination, or one who has merely wandered slightly astray, contemplating the intricacies of his business affairs. Or like the explorer, though conscious of their observant eyes, consider that it may be timidity that makes them watchful. They will not attack you, unless startled. Therefore make your actions understandable within their reasoning. If you must wander, do so with an air of purpose. To the denizens of these industrious thoroughfares, aimlessness is incomprehensible. Turn back like one recalled by an important engagement. Start down side streets as if an errand led you most imperatively in that direction. Above all, never knuckle under. Or at worst, choose one among them and follow him, letting his course, his actions determine yours. Never let them follow you, for then they gain confidence and become dangerous. All right, and then here's the last section I'll read, close to the end. But mark, though I have said that the man is the master of the animal, he is not such. On the contrary, the whole course of his relationship to it is a process of subjecting himself to it, of governing himself according to his modes of conduct, of suiting his actions to its way of thinking. The lion tamer, entering the stage, must do as the lion would have him do. His least departure from the routine of the performance is met with the teeth, the claws, the pandemoniac fury of the beast. So with these others. Never frighten or outrage them. Be delicate. Equal yourself to them. See that nothing you do shall pass beyond the limits of their comprehension. Are you moved to address the man seated opposite you in the child's restaurant? Descending from the elevated station to the bright street below you, do you feel impelled to begin a conversation with the young lady moving step by step beside you, like your partner accompanying you down the grand staircase to a ballroom? Beware of elaborate tentatives, of timid avowals. These will only perplex them and arouse their suspicions. Limit yourself instead rigidly to the commonplace. Invest the transaction with the aura of the usual. Say to him casually, "Your necktie is crooked." Say to her with a friendly interest, "Which way do you go from here, east or west?" His hand will go to his collar. She will answer you. In either case, it will be but an instant before your companion realizes that your assumption of friendship rests on no basis whatsoever. But meantime, you will have enjoyed a moment of true intimacy with them, an intimacy the purer because it cannot last. This has its value to the lonely wanderer. Yeah, I think I would say Coates has been a new favorite for me. I'm trying to get a hold of his third novel he wrote, A Bitter Season, but it was never reprinted, and it's pretty uncommon, it seems. But they have it at my rare book library at my university, so I'll probably check that out. I may make a video about that when I read it. But yeah, he was, just after he published this book, he became an art reviewer, and he was actually the one to coin the term abstract expressionism for, people like Jackson Pollock and whoever, which I think is neat. It kind of gives a connection to Frank O'Hara and the New York School, who are actually named after abstract expressionism. But after his third novel, he wrote some genre fiction, like psychological thriller types. And he is actually most famous, maybe apart from that abstract expressionism, he's most famous for a book he wrote in 1930 called The Outlaw Years and it's about land pirates in the Natchez Trace Trail, which I think is pretty neat because I used to live in Tennessee, and we went out one time for one reason or another to Alan Jackson's mansion, and it was located right off the Natchez Trace Trail, so that was pretty neat. But yeah, he's not famous at all now, Coates. I found him just out of luck, really, and I like his stuff a lot. As you can see, it's really similar to a lot of the really great European modernists, walking through the city, the really precise impressions and details. Yeah, so I think I'll end by reading this poem by Fernando Pessoa. It was written July 4th, 1934, probably about the time that Coates was finishing up this book. It's by Alvaro de Campos. I got off the train and said goodbye to the man I'd met. We'd been together for 18 hours and had a pleasant conversation, fellowship in the journey, and I was sorry to get off, sorry to leave this chance friend whose name I never learned. I felt my eyes water with tears. Every farewell is a death. Yes, every farewell is a death. In the train that we call life, we are all chance events in one another's lives, and we all feel sorry when it's time to get off. All that is human moves me because I am a man. All that is human moves me not because I have an affinity with human ideas or human doctrines, but because of my infinite fellowship with humanity itself. The maid who hated to go, crying with nostalgia for the house where she'd been mistreated. All of this, inside my heart, is death and the world's sadness. All of this lives because it dies inside my heart, and my heart is a little larger than the entire universe. Alright, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked any of these sections, let me know, and try to get a hold of Robert Coates if you can. Death is a gang boss.